Okay, so here's our little review piece. So one, you need to know that a chemical change is actually where our atoms that form up our molecules are being pulled apart and then put back together, whether that be with different chemicals or just pulled apart with themselves. But there needs to actually be a full-on chemical change or chemical difference that has occurred. Now, there are 5 signs of chemical change and that it may have occurred. One, we would get a different color. Secondly, an odor is going to be detected. Thirdly, maybe bubbles of gas appear or form. We could get a solid that forms during the chemical reaction, and we call that a precipitate. And then finally, we could have some energy given off or absorbed in this case. We talked about different color changes and examples of that, as well as, that odor and the difference between that and bubbles and gases. Precipitate, that's a really good vocab word. So you need to know that a precipitate is a solid that forms when you mix 2 liquids together after a chemical change. Energy changes, so knowing what our energy is when it comes to a chemical change, we definitely need to know that. We also talked about chemical changes or chemical reactions in cooking. So you need to know, what makes it so that food ripens, how yeast is involved in cooking and how the chemical changes that it does, how odor is affected by that. We also talked about chemical reactions in cleaning. So we talked specifically about solubility, about how different stains are going to be soluble with different materials. So we need to make sure that we are using the right chemical in order to make that soluble and actually pull it out. And then pH, so our balancing of acids and bases. You also need to know what emulsion is. So emulsion takes something that is like an oil, or is what's called non-polar, and something that is polar, like water, and it actually allows those two to become bonded. Okay, this is, believe it or not, mayo is actually made out of water and oil and eggs. Okay, and the eggs work as the emulsion unit in order to make it so that the water and the oil don't separate, and that's essentially what an emulsifier does. You'll also need to know chemical reactions in gardening, so you need to know what nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium do, and we talked about that in the video. You need to know the difference between chemical changes and phase changes, where phase changes, the chemical composition of that particular material doesn't change, but just the bonds between the chemical components is what's changing. They're speeding up, they're moving farther apart, that sort of thing. I hope that answers is a good review for this particular lesson.